The differences between understeer and oversteer and how to correct it. A wise man once said, "Understeer works like this. You drive down the road, you turn the wheel, but the car goes straight on, crashes into a tree, and you die. Oversteer works like this. You drive down the same bit of road, turn the wheel, but the back of the car comes around like this, and you go off the road, crash into the tree, and you die." Now oversteer is best because you don't see the tree that kills you. And while this description sums up both phenomena pretty nicely, we're going to dig a little deeper to explain why this happens and how to correct it. Understeer. Understeer is generally considered as being safer than oversteer because it's more predictable and easier to correct. This is why most new cars are designed to understeer rather than oversteer, so here's how it works. Understeer happens when the front wheels lose grip due to excessive speed or because of hard braking through a corner, which can lock the front wheels. The side effect of this is that instead of turning the car as commanded by the driver, the front tyres simply wash across the road surface in a straighter than desired line. Understeer is most common in front-wheel drive cars because the front wheels have to turn and accelerate at the same time. However, it can also be problematic for all-wheel drive cars, most notably Audis because of the engine placement that's forward of the front axle. But even rear-wheel drive vehicles can understeer. When understeer occurs, especially in a front-wheel drive or front-biased all-wheel drive car, the easiest way to negate it is by reducing steering lock and easing off the throttle to allow the front wheels to gain grip. The same theory applies for the brake pedal if that's a reason why the car is understeering. In a rear-wheel drive car, the same theory to negate understeer can be applied. However, another technique that only experienced track drivers should attempt is to apply more throttle to overcome the traction of the rear wheels, which will cause the rear of the car to step out, therefore reducing the amount of understeer. This is known as oversteer, which we'll get into properly later. Back to front-wheel drive and front-biased all-wheel drive cars, combating understeer by means of easing off the throttle or brake pedal is easier said than done, because the majority of less experienced drivers will instinctively try to fight understeer by adding more steering lock, therefore increasing what's known as slip angle. This is bad, because the amount of useful tyre contact patch with the road is reduced further, making the crash with a tree even more inevitable. Another mistake people make is to completely lift off the throttle. The danger here is that as you lift off the gas, the weight of the car is suddenly thrown to the front axle, making the rear end very light and potentially causing the car to spin on its axis. This is called lift-off oversteer, and anyone who's unwillingly been through it will know how scary that is. Oversteer. For most car lovers, perfectly executed oversteer is as good a feeling as sex. It's the art of making a car dance beyond the limit of grip, and when you learn how to perfectly control it, every corner, roundabout and T-junction is a potential celebration of going sideways. Except in the eyes of the laws, other road users and general common sense. But enough of the gushing, here's how oversteer happens and how to combat it. Oversteer happens when the rear wheels lose grip first in the corner, which makes the rear end of the car step out and rotate around its axis. Oversteer can happen for a variety of reasons, most commonly the fact that you've gone into a corner with too much throttle, which means the rear tyres spin up and begin to slide. This is more prominent in cars with a limited slip differential because as the drive to the wheels is locked, both tyres spin up at the same speed, which limits traction. Firmness at the rear end is another factor that aids oversteer, which is why cars like the BMW M4 can be particularly tail happy. Another reason for oversteer is by means of lifting off the throttle, which induces lift-off oversteer that we touched on earlier. The basic premise here is that as you lift off the gas, the weight of the car is suddenly thrown forward, which makes the rear end very light, which in turn reduces traction drastically on the rear axle. Lift-off oversteer is a technique to get a front-wheel drive car sideways, but can be tricky to master. Oversteer can also occur if a lower than desired gear is accidentally selected at high speed. When this occurs in extreme circumstances, the rear wheels lock up because the selected gear cannot power the already fast-spinning rear wheels fast enough, causing them to lock up. The weight of the car is therefore thrown forward, and with even a hint of steering lock, the rear of the car kicks out sideways and launches you into a barrier. Obviously, careful gear selection is how you avoid lockups like this, which is complemented by heel and toe downshifts to avoid over-revving. Other oversteer techniques including provoking the car's balance with aggressive weight transfer, otherwise known as the Scandinavian flick, which is especially effective on cars with lower power and wallowy suspension. You can also simply yank the handbrake mid-corner too, although prolonged prolonged handbrake usage like this stretches and can even snap the handbrake cable. The way to combat oversteer is fairly straightforward in principle, but can be very difficult to master. As the rear of the car rotates, you need to countersteer into the skid and gradually decrease the throttle pressure. This brings the car back onto a neutral keel, but as I said, first-timers to this, especially when taken by surprise, may struggle to regain control, especially if traction control is switched off or not fitted. In general, keeping your foot on the throttle pedal and drifting it out is far safer than suddenly lifting off the gas, as this causes the car to suddenly regain traction and pendulum the car into the opposite direction. There are other measures you can take to make sure your car is less prone to oversteer. These include reducing ride height at the rear, softening the rear suspension, increasing camber and towing at the rear, increasing the front roll bar, adding a wing for better downforce, plus a lot more. By contrast, a few basic principles to make your car less prone to understeer include softening up the front sway bars and spring rates, reducing ride height at the front, increasing front camber, fitting your car with wider tyres and widening the front track, to name but a few. But when all's said and done, the most important thing to remember is to have good tyres from the get-go, because without those, all your hard work and driving skill goes out of the window if your only contact with the road is thanks to old cheap rubber that's about as useful as a spoon in a knife fight. Also, make sure that traction control is switched on and that your steering, braking, throttle and gear change inputs are smooth and accurate to avoid lockups and unwanted changes of direction. And remember, as the saying goes, understeer scares drivers, oversteer scares passengers. So be careful out there and make sure you know what you're doing and how to get yourself out of trouble if you unexpectedly understeer or oversteer.